template. I showed you some of the sounds I was using, but I'll show you some of the main ones I'm using in the movie. This is the CS80 samples, just some synth stuff. I'm using a lot of real synths on this. I have the Arturia Mini Brute and also the Korg Poly 6, and I also have some modular stuff, and I'll show you that in another video. I'm going to do a separate video on my analog gear probably, but for now, this is something I use at the end of the cue. I use throughout the Bunnyman films. It's called gutter bass. It's actually samples that I made from electric bass that I detuned, and I'm using a really great plugin I like called Granite, which is like a granular synthesis, so it can scroll through the sound without, you can change the pitch without changing the speed, which is you also change direction of how the cursor is, how it's scrolling through the sound. So it's that whole FFT sort of granular thing, which I've done before with, but this makes it a lot easier to do on the fly granular stuff. It's kind of CPU intensive, but so this is one of the samples I created. I like to try to create a lot of sounds that I use. So that's that one. That's some of these I'm just gonna skip for now. Moog bass, so mini Moog plug in there. Some of these are Easter Island. We all know what that is. That's the percussion from the Spitfire Albion one. Here's the sound I use for the end of the cue. We'll talk about that. It's CS80 kind of sound, which I really like. Here's a Juno bass sound. So we got some synths here. We have the piano that I showed you, which is, I think it's the felt piano, the Oliver Spitfire collection. Oliver Arnold's the composer. He did like Broadchurch and stuff. He has a really cool collection with Spitfire, a couple collections. The Mellotron stuff I showed you. Guitar. Detune 60. This is also from the Oliver collection. So this is a cool sound I use a lot in the film. Has a nice like wobble effect. Sorry, I get some. Alright, so I have a bunch of those lined up there. What else is some modular stuff? Another Granite thing, I'm not sure what this was. Oh, this is some guitar samples I made. I kind of warped. So for textural stuff, I like to use some of my own things here. So that's electric guitar. We have some traditional orchestral things here. Some Lindrum samples that I use at a certain point to get kind of that vibe going. This is kind of organ sound I use with one of the themes here, which is this. So that's a kind of, a classic horror. Since I don't know what this is exactly. Oh, I think I was MIDIing some of the external synths here. I use a clavinet for certain things. Because there's some funky kind of things that happen. Same with the Rhodes. So I get that. Saxes that I kind of used them, but then I pulled them out. I don't know. Kind of on the fence about using brass. Yeah. So I'm going for kind of a smaller ensemble, I think. Except for the bigger Goldsmith stuff. Got some guitar happening in certain points. We'll talk about that. Some fuzz sound here. So I'll show you that later on with a certain part of the cue. So there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm not going to go through everything because it would take a long time, but here's some string drops that I made. I think I made them with some VSL, the viola, I think, or something. Another CS80 sound. So that kind of thing. I use a lot of the Evo stuff from Spitfire, which is great for these kind of slow glissandi type things. That's tremolo. So yeah, I love using this. This is one of my favorite, especially for this type of stuff. But not even for other stuff. Just the evolving aspects of the strings, sort of. You know, even if you do a chord. I mean, this is kind of, see down here. It's just smart how it evolves. Over time, and I think that's what makes it interesting. So I use this a lot. But you guys, you know, you can check that out elsewhere, but you can map out all the ranges with different samples. It's kind of cool. Some of the orchestral stuff, I'm using a mixture of things, but staccatos are the cinematic studio strings, and some of the legatos too. And I'm using some Albion 1 stuff as well. Bartok pits here. I'm using some brass. I'm using the Berlin brass. We'll get into this part of the cue later on, but got some woodwind shorts, which I think is Albion 1. Percussion is Spitfire. I got some old. I'm using some old percussion libraries too for some timp effects. I'm actually using, I think it's, yeah, True Strike. If you remember that. Blast from the past, but has some cool timp effects in there, so I'm using some of those. A lot of small percussion stuff here. Waterphone, you know, that sort of, this thing, which is from Spitfire. Xylophone, orchestral piano, and yeah, that's it. Some boom stuff. Metal trash. This is some metal samples I made. I don't know. Some bowing cymbals and scraping stuff. So I don't know if I use it in this cue, but I like these things. So that's the template. So let's get back to this cue here. So I showed you the first part. Now the next section, which goes from 37, let me get there, from 37 seconds, let me show you the film, to 1 minute and 21 seconds. And that's basically just suspenseful sort of thing here. Now he does this split screen wipe here, so I did a gesture with that, the musical gesture. So let me just play you what I did and then I'll talk about it. So I'm going to go back. I'll go back to the transition for you with the image here. So this part is just straight, suspenseful kind of vibe, incorporating some analog stuff there. Also, Jerry Goldsmith type percussion sounds. I'm also using that guitar loop that I created there. I'll show you some of the stuff that's happening here once we watch it. already start building up. Okay, so that's where we get into the Goldsmith stuff, and some of those samples aren't loaded yet, so that's why it sounded weird. But so we'll get into that next cue later. But before that, I'll analyze here what I did for all the layers. So that swipe there, that little, is actually I took out some of this stuff. Let me join this up. This is actually a piano gliss that I created, and what I did was I pitch shifted a bunch of glissandos I did inside the piano, so it sounds like that. So there's some microtonal stuff happening. It creates kind of like a cloud texture. I had this hit in here too, but it had sort of too much tonality in it, if that makes sense. So I took it out. So that kind of ushers in the cue here. Goes with that wipe that you see on the screen, and the split screen when you see Bunnyman on the other side there. So this granite thing is that guitar loop that I showed you before. So that just creates sort of like a pad kind of noise. It's got a little tonality to it, but it's more of a texture. So that's underneath this. But I didn't want that to be too loud, so it's pretty low in the mix here. And then over that, we have the melody in the Detune 60. Before that, we have some analog synth, and I think this was the Poly 6. Either the Poly 6 or the... Yeah, that's Poly 6. I could tell by the bass there. Because I also have the Arturia, but it doesn't have that deep, I don't know, something about that Korg that has a really nice sound there. So that goes on. That's kind of like a John Carpenter type thing here. So over that we have this melody in the Detune 60, that's from the Olafur sample library. I'll show you that, because this is important. I use this throughout the film. It's from the Olafur Arnold's Composer Toolkit from Spitfire. So that's a nice kind of sound. It's a really great library. I love that. Okay, so that's the melody there, and a melody is one of the themes I use throughout the film. So here we have all the layers happening here. You're not hearing the granite right now, but these are just little punctuations, because I don't want it to be too abrupt when we go to the more Goldsmith type Planet of the Apes thing. So I had more orchestral, traditional orchestral stuff happening. I had some solo violin thing here, but I took it out. What was that? Yeah, that wasn't necessary there. So this is the typical piano, xylophone sort of gesture here happening. Had a gong scrape here, but I took that out. Trying to be a little more subtle with this. This part, so we can hear the dialogue. You gotta be careful with that, with percussion. Okay, so I like that timbre thing there that I did, which is kind of worth talking about. I think I had like a cluster happening in the piano, which is then taken over by a timp glissandi. Which, here's the timpani. So that's like a pedal glissando in the timpani. So I wanted to match that timbre with the orchestral piano to create something something kind of new here. So you hear how they blend there kind of nicely. Had some bongos in here, but I took those out because it was a little, like I said, you got to be careful with the dialogue. So it was a little too much there, so I took that out. So we have the scrape there going into shaker kind of stuff, which I kind of liked. I wanted that high-end kind of thing. And another temp effect here. Well, that brings us into the next kind of Motivic thing. Another temp gliss. We have the water phone leading into this figure here, right? Which I doubled. So that's the xylophone. It's also doubled with the harp and some Bartok pits. The harp also has a delay on it, so that creates a cool kind of effect. Very sort of 70s, sort of early kind of horror score, even 80s Friday the 13th kind of stuff, with some other, right? So that's very kind of classic horror, not so much the modern horror, but more Motivic kind of stuff. So let's hear it all together here. And that goes with the synth kind of thing there too. We hear long strings here coming in too, creating that tension. And then right there is where we transition into the more Planet of the Apes kind of vibe. But a couple other things here. I have trombone here, doing this, adding to this long note. Also, you'll notice there's a synth thing in here. So I want to carry that through the whole cue here. So that was, I think, the Poly6 again. Alright, so I'm opening up the filter there.